Ms. Robbins,
Yes.
John Shoup here. How are you?
Hi, good. How are you?
I'm happy today. Thanks for
Good.
doing this. Let me share with you a little bit of who we have in terms of our interviewees and what I did last time in a little town called Tiffin. I wanted to get and the idea came from, it's just not some kind of corporate thing, okay? It's just me with an idea. And the little town of Tiffin, where I teach in right now, I realized that during the fall of 20, and spring of 21, that the obituaries were getting very, very numerous in the papers. And the pandemic didn't really affect me very much because we just went online teaching and that was it. When I saw the obituaries go up, I'm like, what the heck's happening? I made some phone calls and realized it was really impacting a lot of people in so small town. And so I wondered how these people dealt with it, you know, all different parts of it. So I interviewed everybody between coroners, STNAs, emergency room nurses, funeral home directors, and so on. And I realized they all had a story to tell. And it was amazing. And once they realized that they got their story told and the artist then heard the story, the high school artists and the high school students really got impacted as well. Because in the beginning, they really weren't. But they really began to feel it. It was an amazing connection. So I realized that our town is like any other town. Same thing happened. It happened across the world. So I should try this some other place besides, and I live in Cleveland. That's why I decided to do it in Cleveland. And I got Cleveland School for the Arts, providing me the art students. And I've got St. Vincent nurses, psych units from UH, some people who work with the inner city people on the diabetic program. It's an amazing diabetic program from St. Vincent. Funeral home directors, National Guardsmen, all different kinds of people. Because when I did the first gallery exhibit, you had people loved it because you had such a variety of occupations and a variety of artists. I'm not an artist, I teach chemistry.
Oh, okay.
But when I saw people's reaction to it, I realized that when you go to an art show or a gallery exhibit, usually from the same person, you know, it's the same kind of art.
Right.
But this was so different. And everybody connected with it when I was at 70th Street Studios. Everyone connected with the story and the event and the art. It was just amazing. So I'm doing it in Cleveland now. So I really appreciate your time in doing this with me.
Oh, not a problem.
So the day it happened, March 17, 2020, when everything shut down, were you aware of this, that this may happen before that, being in the news or no?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, so, you know, I had brain surgery October of 19. And, you know, while I was off in January, you know, I'm still paying attention to the news and, you know, I read, I'm not normal. I read, you know, medical journals and that sort of thing. And then, you know, with national news, I started noticing, you know, this outbreak in China, you know, December 31st, when they went public. I started noticing this in early January. And, you know, it's funny. You know, I just did a story yesterday on Terry Allen, the Cuyahoga County Health Commissioner, retiring. And we used to, you know, every time there was a different outbreak, we used to joke, is this it? Because we all knew a pandemic was coming. We just didn't know when, and really hoped we wouldn't see it in our lifetime. So, but this one, I don't know why, it just felt different to me. We were already in the midst of a pretty bad flu season, and our flu vaccine was only 35% effective. Yep. And, you know, I don't know why, there was just something weird about this one. So I returned to work on January 13th, and I had a meeting with my management, and I told them, this is something we have to watch. And everybody kind of looked at me like, okay, Monica, you know, you've been away for a while. And I'm like, no, this is really something we need to watch. And they asked if I thought it was here. And one thing that a lot of people did not realize was that Ohio and Wuhan were sister states. And we traded a lot of academics from our various universities. Really? They had gone back and forth. So whether or not they brought it here, who knows? But, you know, we did, you know, in China, the cases actually, they started seeing them in August. And, you know, then things started getting worse in September. And then by fall in China, it was ridiculous. And, but yeah, that's, I think a lot of, and the governor actually mentioned that the sister state thing where, you know, we had, and you know, Lord knows who, engineers, whatever,
right,
you know, might have been going back and forth. So we had people visiting Wuhan before it was shut down. And so whether or not they brought it back, who knows? But I knew, I was aware of this, and I told management that I thought it was already here. And they said, and I said, we just have to watch it. I really don't know what it's going to mean. But I was touching base with, you know, my sources in health and infectious disease, and everybody felt the same way, that we were just kind of like watching this one. What was different about this one was the way it affected people. And so when, you know, we had a scare in mid to late February, where one of the first 5 cases, a gentleman had a wife from China who had gone home to visit family. She came back to Chicago. She infected her husband. Her husband was unaware. He got on a plane. He came to Cleveland, and he went and did a presentation at a local company downtown. And then we find out from the Illinois Health Commissioner and our sister station in Chicago that this guy got on a plane and came to Cleveland, and he was one of the first 5 cases. So
wow.
I had called the state and the, you know, ODH to let them know and find out if they were aware of this, because the Illinois Health Commissioner said it in a press conference that the guy came to Cleveland.
Wow.
They, at the time, they were not aware. Nobody, you know, and bear in mind, I mean, this is the beginning of all this.
Right.
There was very little communication because nobody knew what we were dealing with.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, we broke the news about the guy who came to Cleveland and just said, you know, we alerted the Ohio Department of Health. Dr. Acton was aware, but you know, as of that moment, you know, they weren't quarantining any of the people the guy had exposure to. They were just, you know, letting them know, just pay attention. And fortunately, to my knowledge, none of those people were infected. And then, of course, you know, then fast forward to March 9th, we have the announcement that the first 3 cases in Ohio were, you know, from Cuyahoga County. But prior to that, we had a couple of college folks who were being quarantined and tested. Now, keep in mind, our testing abilities back in the beginning of this pandemic were very, very limited. The CDC wasn't sharing their test with everybody, you know, and then it was finally like a handful of states got access to the CDC test. But, you know, this virus, you know, our testing wasn't as sensitive, and this virus could, you know, you could be infected, you could, you know, give it to other people, you could be asymptomatic, and then your body, you know, they could test you and you may not, they may not even register virus in your system, depending on how long you had it.
Right.
And so, you know, we were getting, and by the time these people got tested, and by the time, and again, you know, nobody was really sure what to do. So I personally believe, and we later found out that there were, but I personally believe there were several cases that may have been mistaken for flu.
Yes.
And including deaths that, because, you know, like I said, we had a very, very bad flu year. And don't get me wrong, we did have a bad flu year in addition to. So, but I think a lot of those deaths were getting mixed up. Well, then you have the nursing home in Washington.
Right.
And then it was, you know, the proverbial everything hit the fan. And then everyone started taking it seriously. Meanwhile, back in little old Channel 3, years ago, after 9/11, and we had the anthrax and the smallpox fears, remember the envelopes, all that. And we were terrified that there were going to be bioweapons. And then also in China, back in the early 2000s, there was this thing called bird flu that had transmitted to human beings. And we were all afraid that that could potentially become something serious. And then we had SARS, the first strain of this particular coronavirus. And I think at that point, I remember talking to Terry Allen, and I thought, you know what, I'm going to put a pandemic plan together for the station. And I did. And so, because the government had put out a pandemic playbook. So I took that and I talked to the experts I knew, and we put together a pandemic plan for the station, just in case. Wow. We already had like a terrorism plan. We had all these things because of 9/11. So, probably 02, 03, we had a pandemic plan. And then every time something would happen, I would update it. And so, we went through SARS, we went through West Nile virus, we went through the swine flu, H1N1. Yep. We went through then the big Ebola scare. Remember that? Yep. We had a measles concern. We had all kinds of things that were coming out, and every time I would update our pandemic plan. So when this thing happened, my management was asking me, what do we need to do? What should we be doing? And we literally dusted off this pandemic plan, and I called some experts to say, okay, guys, what should we be doing? And I think we may have been the first in the country to separate our anchors and start putting everybody. Wow. Initially, it was 3 feet apart. I could be wrong. I don't know, but I know we did it. We did it in early March before the shutdown. In fact, it might have been late February. We started separating everyone, and we kept everybody in the same seats. Nobody, we started the hand sanitizer. We started, all of that stuff. And then it escalated to, we had teams, the morning team could only enter through one stairway, just in case somebody was exposed. We started keeping the videographers and the reporters out of the building, because if anybody's going to be exposed, it could have been them. Right. So we kept them working in the field. We started all this in March, long before the shutdown. Wow. And then as things, the plan literally was changing weekly. But the separation was the very first thing we did. And we made it so that nobody was sitting in the same spot, like everybody was sitting in the same spot. Nobody was sharing locations. And we talked to the cleaning crews, and they were, cleaning things. And so we had done this. And then obviously then the other plans came down. And again, the plans obviously started changing and evolving as we started learning more. But, we were ready when they sent us home to, do the news from home. We were ready. And for like the first year or so, I think at any one point, there may have been 6 people in the building. That was it.
How do they feel about doing this before you had any kind of state recommended things like that? Because you were prepared, you had your stuff you've been doing for years, and now you're telling them they have to do this. How did they feel about doing that initially?
I think the more the news came out, I think people were very concerned, and I would like to think that they know me well enough that I'm not making this up. I think everybody took what I had to say into consideration. And then I think it was, at the same time, like, it's a bad flu season. I said, hey, look, at the very least, we'll be protecting people from getting sick for flu.
Right.
You know, so I think it was, okay, we'll start doing this. But I don't think, nobody really questioned it initially. Nobody really questioned it. And then, you know, and then by this point, you know, the Arnold Classic got canceled. And then everybody realized, oh boy, things are changing. And, you know, so it wasn't very long, you know, it might've been a couple of weeks before everything went sideways. And so I think, I don't think anyone really had time to question it, if you know what I mean.
Right.
You know, I think everybody was watching. I mean, this became the lead story regardless. You know, this was the lead story. We were watching this like everyone else.
And you were living the lead story.
Yeah. And it was happening. And I'm thinking, okay, how do we protect ourselves? And it's not the first time. We've done this before, you know, where we watch things that happen nationally or maybe happen at other TV stations, and we take action just for a while, just to, you know, just in case. And so when this started happening, you know, one of the things I said is no more lavalier microphones, you know, and I said, we need to start using stick mics. And then when the testing centers opened, you know, we had reporters going to interview people while they were waiting in those lines. And we decided that no more letting these people roll their windows down just in case. I said, FaceTime them, you know, or hold the microphone up to the window, you know, but we were FaceTime. I remember our reporters were standing right next to cars, FaceTiming or calling the individual, and they were recording the audio, shooting the person in the car, but recording the audio off the phone.
Wow.
So they could have exposure.
Wow.
And I mean, it was like little things like that. It was just, you know, and I'm not going to doubt, maybe some people were like, oh, this is a pain. But as things move forward, then nobody questioned it. You know, everybody was like, okay, this is, you know, I think people started taking more care and concern for their own safety. And they realized, you know what, this is the very least I can do. So I'm going to start doing it.
Did the other news organizations, when you started doing this back in late February, early March, did the other ones look at you and call you up and say, why are you doing this? Or did they know about it?
I don't know. I know, you know, it was funny. We were watching the other stations to see when they would do it, and it took them forever. It felt like, in my opinion, you know, it was probably, we had been doing it for probably a month or 6 weeks before they started. And everybody had to come up with their own plan. I think the only difference is, you know, the other stations, didn't have a health reporter who put together a pandemic plan, or at least thought about these ridiculous things that, you know, like it could have, but, you know, I was there for 9/11. I was there for other things. So from my perspective, I saw the things that we all thought couldn't happen, I saw happen. So from my perspective, I thought nothing's out of the realm of possibility. We might as well have a plan. Exactly.
If they have a plan to not use it, then they don't have a plan and panic.
Yeah. And it was, and, you know, I know a lot of people, you know, they joked with me, but it was funny. Our ops manager, who is former military, you know, he came to me and he's like, hey, I need to pick your brain about what we're going to do. And I'm like, Adam, open your drawer. The pandemic plan's in there. And he pulled it out. And then he, you know, he added, you know, his sense from what, you know, corporate was telling us. And then, you know, he made it a PowerPoint, color coded things, and, you know, and then it was constantly evolving. But he and I were on the phone every few days. You know, after we were sent home, he's like, okay, what do you think I should do here? What do you think I should do there? And I'm like, yeah, this is what we need to do. And, you know, and it became, we were telling people, if you feel sick at all, do not come in, period. Just don't come in. We'll figure it out. So I think I think our folks, hindsight, I'm glad we did what we did. We protected a lot of people early on.
Yep.
And then we had our share of some cases, but they didn't happen until really Delta appeared. That's when
really until then.
Yeah, I mean, one of the reasons was because everybody was gone. We only had we kept one of our anchors at home. We had Laura Queso just started at Channel 3 in March of 20, and she was anchoring from home. We also had an alternate studio planned. So we had already set up an alternate studio at IdeaStream just in case we needed it. If the building had been contaminated, if you will. We had planned that far ahead, that we had alternate places to do the news. Not only were we able to do the news from home, but I remember March 23rd, Jay Crawford and I started doing we started a noon news on March 23rd, the first full day of lockdown. Jay was at his house, I was at my house, and we were doing a noon news that was solely dedicated to COVID-19.
When you were doing the planning and all this stuff, which is phenomenal, did you ever have the feeling that, because I'm a news junkie as well, and I did a report on all the different pandemics, because our students asked me, they're panicking too about it. I said, listen, this would happen before. My grandmother lived through the swine flu of 1918. So I heard from her what happened. But did you ever have the feeling then that when you're planning all this kind of stuff, that it was critically important for you guys to stay on the air? Because the public needs to know from you what to do.
It's funny you say that. And no, it never occurred to me that we wouldn't be on the air. Never occurred to me once that we wouldn't be. Yes, because for that reason. I mean, I think it's one of those things like, and I don't know how to explain it other than the been there, done that. But I think all of those other public health emergencies that we had gone through the previous 2 decades prepared me that I wasn't ever nervous, I guess, if you will. I just thought the only concern I had was that, the government put together a pandemic plan post 9/11. And the first thing I saw happening was no one was following the communication aspect of it, which the communication aspect is the same message top down.
And it's critical. It's critical to have that.
It is critical. And I think that is what caused so much confusion and so much mistrust. And I can tell you, thanks to Zoom, I literally was talking to experts around the world, not just our phenomenal local people, but I was talking to people around the world on the front lines of this. And from there, I think, my concern with this virus was that we'd never seen anything like it before. I've never seen a virus, and I asked the infectious disease specialist I talked to, and they agreed with me. Never have we seen a virus that impacted people in such a myriad of ways.
I agree.
For example, you could have a family of 5, and I interviewed one. You could have a family of 5, all get infected, and they all had different symptoms. One had breathing difficulty. One, it got so bad they had pneumonia and had to be hospitalized. Another just had headaches and fatigue. Another lost their smell and taste. Another had the typical cold symptoms. Another, it was ridiculous how this virus did different things to different people, the way it infected them. And from that perspective, that's why I think public health had no choice but just to tell people, okay, the best thing we can do is separate, wash your hands, which I've said a billion times in the last 24 years. Wash your hands and keep 6 feet of separation. And if you're sick, stay away from people, and if you don't have to go out, don't.
One of the big things that I think you also probably understand too is the information, a lack of communication, but also the disinformation.
Oh my God, yeah.
Because the ability,
to me, in my opinion, the disinformation should be criminal.
I agree.
Now the misinformation, there was so much confusion, and then you had so much mixed messaging, which from my perspective as a communicator, I think that was the biggest travesty of this, was that there were so many mixed messages, and you had too many cooks in the kitchen.
Yep.
And too many people who did not have medical backgrounds saying things that they shouldn't have been saying. And then because of social media, so much was taken out of context. Initially we didn't know how this illness was transmitted. We assumed it was probably respiratory, but no one knew.
I know.
And then what we did know is that we had a shortage of PPE and for our medical teams that needed it more than anybody. And because if they got sick, we were in a whole heck of a lot of trouble. And, when you have a shortage of PPE, the reason people were told not to wear masks was because the medical teams needed them.
Exactly.
It wasn't because masks weren't going to be useful. And then you have the whole thing about, well, masks don't really work. And my thing is, okay, next time I have brain surgery, I'll tell the whole team not to wear a mask.
I agree with you. And
we've been wearing masks for eons because they do work, and that infuriated me, that there was so much misinformation put out there. But at the same time, I think one of the problems, we're Americans and we want an instant answer. We want instantly to be able to blame somebody. We want instantly to be able to know exactly what we need to do. And what this taught me is that, and you're an educator, what this taught me is our education system is severely lacking in science.
I agree.
Because the fact that people didn't understand the basic concepts of how a virus transmits was just beyond me.
I have a theory behind that, by the way. I volunteer at chemistry at a high school here, and I've taught it for years, but I'm also an industry guy, and I've been in industry my whole life too. But I think what happens is when you have the science teachers in high school, they don't know how to teach. They're not really chemistry or biology. They're science. And so they don't really understand how to teach it well. They may understand a little bit of it, but by the time the kids get to college, when you have the really good professors who know this stuff, they're overwhelmed by it, and they just drop the class because they haven't been prepared for it. And I've realized that by volunteering at this high school, that I'm teaching them chemistry every day versus 2 days a week at the university, and they're getting it because I'm teaching it the way I think a person who knows it should do that. And I think you're right, because the public doesn't understand this from high school education or high school biology, high school chemistry, because they tuned it out or they didn't want to believe it or whatever. And I think that's a huge part of it.
I do believe that was a lot of the problem. And then, the fact that this entire thing became politicized is an incredible travesty. I think a lot of people died that didn't have to because of that. And those are the things that will haunt me. That the things that, all I could do every day, I was the lead story every single day for over 16 months. And what will haunt me, and all I could do was just present the information I had at the time. And I repeatedly said, folks, I'm telling you this today, But there could be a very good chance that what I'm going to tell you tomorrow is different, because we're learning new things every day. And the other thing people did not grasp was the fact that this was a global pandemic that we had not seen in a century. I don't think people, and everybody was concerned about how quickly I apologize.
It's okay.
My dogs. I have roofers here doing my roof, and my dog is going ballistic. I think the other thing that, okay, thank you. The other thing that was crazy about this was that, you know, we didn't know, and no one realized that when you're dealing with this, every brilliant mind on the planet was now focused on the same thing. We've never had that in our living history.
No.
Ever.
And that's why I agree with you 100% on that.
And the other thing that I don't think the public could grasp is that, you know, we were in such a desperate time. I mean, initially what was happening in Italy and France was just, you know, we could not understand what was really happening until it happened in New York. And I think what the public did not grasp is when you have governments putting not millions, but billions of dollars into scientific research, you know, and the public, of course, nobody cares about research until it's available. But the mRNA vaccines were going to be our next vaccines regardless. They just needed to figure out how to stabilize them. But mRNA was going to be our next flu shot.
Wow.
And I don't think people realized, like, there had been more than 2 decades of research going into these mRNA vaccines. And then when but they couldn't figure out how to stabilize it. Then when you have governments dumping billions of dollars into these pharmaceutical companies to speed up their research, and you have regulatory agencies cutting all the red tape, it's no wonder we had vaccines as quickly as we did.
Exactly.
I mean, Pfizer started Moderna and Pfizer started early clinical trials by the end of April.
I know, that was amazing to me. In 1918, when it happened, because there was less communication, people weren't aware what was happening for months until that's when it happened. And it started, when I've read, it started in Kansas, I think, at a pig farm in Kansas.
At a military base.
Yeah.
And we're probably the ones who made it the global pandemic that it became.
Exactly.
You know, the only reason it's called the Spanish flu is because poor Spain wasn't involved in World War I.
I know. That's amazing to me when I find that out. So I look at when you compare the pandemics between no communication and nothing but communication, you also have to look at the fact that you have nothing but bad communication as well, or misinformation, disinformation along with that. So that can create the panic.
And that happened in 1918, 19 as well. You know, we had people who were adamantly opposed to vaccines. We had people who were adamantly opposed to lockdown or quarantine. I mean, it's the tale of 2 cities. What was it?
Philadelphia.
Philadelphia and St. Louis.
Yeah.
You know, the tale of 2 cities. I mean, I think part of the problem, you know, I think public health was doing what the common sense route. You know, when the governor shut down Ohio, that was the common sense route. But when you have so many people who weren't going to follow that, or you know, took it as a threat to their civil liberties, you know, we were never going to quell the virus, but we did flatten the curve. I mean, Ohio was well ahead of everybody else in the beginning of this, until this got, you know, ridiculously politicized, and people were listening to politicians with no medical background over people who understood how a virus works. You know, and again, this was a virus. The virus was behaving exponentially because it was mutating every 2 months, which is not typical
No.
of a virus. But it was mutating globally every 2 months because of the ability of its spread. And then, you know, as it continued to do that, you know, and then it was still affecting people in different ways. And it's just, you know, I think the disinformation, the people who were, you know, putting bad information out there or telling people what they should be taking, you know, intentionally trying to cause chaos in the situation. That is one of the biggest travesties of this pandemic. And but from my perspective, like I said, the only thing I could do was give the information I had at the time, and I was not going to speculate. I was not going to, you know, I was double and triple checking with various infectious disease experts every single day. And a lot of people, when the vaccines first came out, they asked me, you know, here I am, I still have a brain tumor. Why would I go get vaccinated? And I tell them, because never in my career have I seen physicians practice what they preach, especially those who understand this far better than the rest of us, who were, you know, climbing all over each other, just trying to get into a clinical trial to get access to this vaccine, and then putting their children in clinical trials so their children could have access to this vaccine.
You know, it's a unique situation with that comparison to that polio of the 50s.
Yeah.
The polio was such a small amount of people were affected by it. In
3,000.
terms of, right. But the fear of them being affected by it was what caused it and what drove it. And so they had to have a huge clinical trial just so that the results wouldn't be part of the noise.
Right.
And they couldn't have anybody tell who was getting the real vaccine, who was getting the placebo. No one knew except for Jonas Salk, because he didn't want anybody to, because there were parents pleading to have their kids get the real one, and they couldn't tell them that. It would just confound the results.
You know, the virus was actually separated so Salk could make the vaccine. It was actually done here at Metro.
Really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, they were, I think the doctor was, I'm probably getting this wrong, might have been Monica Robbins with 2 B's. I think might have been him, and maybe Rammelkamp had something to do with it. I'm not sure, but you can Google. But yeah, they were able to isolate the virus, and so Jonas Salk was able to take that and create a vaccine.
I speak on, when I teach biochem, I speak on viruses, and I speak upon things that happened previously and how they were solved. And the polio vaccine was always an amazing one to me. My mother lived through that. She didn't get polio, but she lived through it. And it's amazing how you had to have so many different people be part of this, and they all had to be grade school children.
Yep.
And what we did, the fears that we had, shut the pools down. We locked people in the room. We had to burn kids' clothing and their stuffed animals. They thought it would spread that way.
Yeah.
It was amazing. And they had 2 ways. It had it in 1910, around there, 1900s. And then they had a second wave in the 50s. It was even bigger. And it started because people were around each other all the time. And it was just in the summertime. So it was amazing. Anyways, Ms. Robbins, you've been fantastic. I don't want to take all your time on this, but you've been fantastic.
Yeah, no problem. I know I just kind of rambled. So
no, you did not.
Was there any, I'm at home today, so I'm not going in until these roofers are done. So if you have anything else, feel free.
Well, you were tremendous. Let me just share what's going to happen. Okay. So what we do is we give this story then to a high school art teacher, then she listens to it and gives it to a student in Cleveland School for the Arts or another art program in Cleveland. And so I'm going to have about 20 to 25 of these. And I'm looking at having the unveiling then sometime in the fall, let's say October, where you get to meet the artist, and then they get to share how they felt about your story. And then you guys meet for the first time, then you unveil the artwork, and then you get to take it home with you. That's the whole deal. And the main thing I wanted people to do is that who lived through this like you have, is that to when you're 80, 90 years old and your grandkids ask how bad was the pandemic of 2019, 2020, you can show them the artwork. And
wow.
Because you'll have, I mean, I feel, in my opinion, we lived through 9/11, but that was just this country. But this was an historical marker in time to the whole planet.
Yeah.
The first time it ever happened to any of us.
Yep.
And that's a big deal to me. That's why I want to make sure that something is done before it just goes away. And I'm, you know?
I personally, you know, this virus is never going away. We're going to have to live with it. But from my perspective, I hope it's going to continue mutating. It's going to continue to be far more contagious, but hopefully less severe disease. But still, there are going to be some who are impacted detrimentally, just like some people can die from a cold.
Right.
And but I think this is my hope. You know, initially, yeah, we may be needing a booster vaccine every year, like a flu shot. But I do think in the next 50 or so years, my hope is that this virus just becomes no more than a common cold, because, you know, it is all of us who've been impacted by it, all of us who've had it now have it in our genetic code, whether we've been vaccinated or not.
Exactly.
We have it in our genetic code, and we'll be passing that on. So the next few generations, maybe if they're exposed to this, it'll be no more than a wicked cold. That's my hope.
We can hope for that. Ms. Robbins, thank you again for everything. Your perspective was amazing. It was absolutely amazing because you saw it happen. You planned for it. I think you had planned for this for a long time, but because you were in the right place at the right time, it was destiny for you. And to have a perspective of someone who saw it maybe happening in December, planned for it and prepared for it long before anybody else did is just amazing. That's why your story is so different.
Well, I think it's funny you say that, because the joke was, I thought the universe was really, you know, planning for this, which is why I had to have brain surgery in October, so I'd be back in time to cover a pandemic.
By the way, some of your humor to me is just amazing. With your brain, I read some of your jokes with the brain tumor. I want you to let you know something. I came down with Parkinson's 2 years ago.
Oh, wow.
And so I had to try to make some jokes about it to try to deal with it. So I want to go on stage. Just my dream is to go on stage as a stand-up comic, the only Parkinson comic you have out there. And two of my jokes are going to be, if you want a really good James Bond martini, just ask me.
That's awesome.
And the other one is, what do you not have to tell a Parkinson patient when they fall down and hurt themselves? Just shake it off, because we always do that anyways. So I'm working on some more.
You know what you should do? You should do a TED Talk and then incorporate all your jokes into a TED Talk. That's
something to think about. One thing I want to tell you, the reason why I'm doing this also, my dream for this idea is to have, in my opinion, because I'm looking at this from a bigger picture, the world has had one thing in common. It had art. Art knew no boundaries and knew no language barriers. But now we have the pandemic, which knows no boundaries. So I'm combining both of them together. And I'd love to have stories from around the world and do the same thing, have high school students in Italy talk to the patients and people who survived it in Italy, and have the same kind of thing I'm doing here. It can be done anywhere in the country, anywhere in the world, because it happened everywhere in the world. That's my goal. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, I'd be interested to see how other countries react to it compared to ours. If the politicization of it was similar elsewhere as it was here. But I hope in the long term, I truly hope we learn from this.
I hope you do too.
I hope, I'm one of those, I'm a very moderate independent, and I believe in just getting along. And I think that, if you don't have the answer, say you don't have the answer. It's okay.
It's okay not to know. I agree with you 100%.
Yeah. Well, yeah, because I mean, I was comparing this routinely to, you know, a lot of people, you know, 500-600 years ago still thought the earth was flat.
Yep.
And it took, you know, decades before people believed that it wasn't. And I think that's going to be the same thing that happens here.
It could be. I agree with you. Ms. Robbins, thank you so much again. We will be in contact.
Okay, great.
Thanks again.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
All right, take care.